Good evening and welcome to Exceptional Circumstances for Exceptional Learners. I am your host today, Rebecca Muller. Tonight we are talking about the semantics of mathematics and the importance of relationship in support class. And what I'm so thrilled about tonight is that it's a collaborative night. So Educating All Learners Alliance is here with us tonight and is actually sponsoring tonight. And I actually feel like I get to be a guest on my own show. So Gabrielle Oates is with us. She will be asking questions to both me and Chris Allison, who is here from Mindful Math Coaching. So you'll learn a lot more about that as we go on in the night. But yeah, I encountered Educating All Learners in my search for all things special ed and was so excited when we were able to kind of talk and figure out what the need was, of what people are thinking about, and what type of program we could put together tonight that would help the community. So Gabby, if you would please introduce a little bit more about EALA, or Educating All Learners, and then we'll get started.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So yeah, as Rebecca mentioned, I'm here with ELA, or the Educating All Learners Alliance. And so ELA was started as a collaborative effort from 6 organizations. Some of them you may recognize. So one is the organization I work directly with called Innovate EDU, ISTE, Brooklyn Lab Charter Schools, the National Center for Learning Disabilities, the National Center for Special Education in Charter Schools, and Digital Promise. So those were the 6 founding organizations of the Alliance. And we have, since our founding in March 2020, we have developed essentially a resource library. We host events, webinars, we have a podcast, all with the goal of ensuring equity for all learners. So we focus particularly in special education, promoting best practices for students with disabilities and educators. So like I mentioned, we have our resource library that's updated weekly. And we noticed that there were people searching for information on math, whether that be particular subjects in math or just general help on engaging students in math in a virtual learning environment and hybrid. And so we are happy to partner today and have this conversation to hopefully share some more best practices.
Yes, absolutely. And I was excited because while I am in the world of special education, math is my day to day. So some of you may know I teach high school math at my local school district. I teach juniors and seniors geometry and algebra 2, but really it's about transitioning them into career or college and really focusing on the things that they need to get to that next step. And then throughout the pandemic, I worked for a company called Thinkster, which is a one-on-one online tutoring program. And I've probably had close to 100 students come and go. I currently have a caseload of about 50. And I've learned so much about how we can use technology to really help kids get to where they need to be. So I'm coming to you from a mindset of living it in the day to day. So I'm excited to share the things that I've encountered and have discovered over the last 12 years, and more specifically within this past year.
Absolutely. And we also are welcoming Mindful Math Coach. So Chrissy, did you want to briefly introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chrissy Allison. I'm a former middle school math teacher and coach. And yes, I've just started Mindful Math Coach about a year ago. And that just came out of my experience. And after I left the classroom, I worked for a couple of educational nonprofits and was able to really see trends across our nation because we worked with a lot of different schools and school districts. And so, and I was the director of math professional learning there. So I worked on all our math PD content and all of that. And so just decided that I wanted to try to share information and insights and resources at a broader scale and lower price point. That's one of my missions. And so I have, a website and lots of resources and things that I can share today, but that's kind of the goal. Yeah. So I'm happy to be here tonight. Thank you for inviting me.
Yay.
And we'll be sharing some of those mentioned resources both throughout and in some follow-up. So be on the lookout for that after today's session. But we want to jump right in and get started. Some of this, some of the things we discussed, you might already know if you're a math instructor yourself, but we're hoping we can have a conversation, again, talk about some good ideas on how to progress in the remaining months of this school year and in the future. So I would just, in looking back, Rebecca, I wanted to ask you just to give us some insight into how your work has transformed in the last year. I'm sure even just from March to March, it's vastly different.
Incredibly so. So it's funny because we're coming across this 1-year anniversary of the last day of typical school. And I can feel it in my body, and like I'm approaching some of the lessons that I was getting to, and I'm pulling the resources, and I was like, this is bizarre. So within those first 2 weeks, it was very much like, this is just gonna be a couple weeks. We're just gonna put them on a math program online. It won't affect instruction. And then we realized that it was going to be a little bit longer. So I know one of the things that I did for my seniors is that I pretty much was meeting with them one-on-one to really focus on their direct needs. And what I learned is I loved it. I learned so much more about the individual child. They felt more supported because they weren't waiting for someone else or afraid to ask a question. They were more willing to make mistakes. And it was a beautiful thing. And I really felt like I was teaching them and not just getting through the content. So when I went into this year, not knowing how long this all was going to last, I started the year, especially for my Algebra 2, because I'm trying to get them to the next steps. And there's a lot of research right now of, do we really need Algebra 2? It's a graduation requirement, but why? And the more deeper into the pandemic we got, I kept saying, am I really going to teach them quadratics? Do they really need that? Like, they might need it for the acuplacer, but what do these kids really need to get to the next step in life? If this quarantine world, working from home, if this is what it's going to look like, if computers are really going to be this much of our lives, how can I help them? So we started the year with a inventory where it wasn't just a pretest, but I asked them how they felt about fractions. What was their experience like? When did they start to not like math? And we had these really great conversations that have helped me to really build my curriculum this year based on what the kids need. And I actually had a great interaction with a student today who I typically in class was quiet. Like, I didn't even know if like he liked to talk or what was up. I have to laugh. My printer has not worked all day and it just decided to go off. So welcome to the world of technology. But anyway, he, one moment.
That's no problem. I was actually going to touch on, I love how, in a way, you formed your own assessment. I'm sure you've all been talking a lot about assessments recently as the information from the Department of Ed has been, coming out in the news, and people are saying, do we need assessments now? But even small assessments, like how do you feel about something, is a nice way to go about, before we get to the state level, what can we do in our own classrooms, especially with math, which, as we know, is quite difficult for many students. So I love that perspective. But yeah, feel free to
And
carry on.
yeah, so my student just, I mean, all day. So we've been working really hard on fractions, decimals, percentages, and making those connections. Because a lot of times we learn them in isolation and we don't realize that they're all the same thing. And when I tell them that, I'm like, I have a secret. Fractions and decimals are exactly the same. They're like, no, they're not. Yeah, they kind of are. And we explore that and look at that. So we're doing percents. And when I tell you this kid answered every question, and I was like, I am so impressed. He's like, well, Miss Muller, I actually need this in my life. So I'm paying attention. And I was like, well, great. Yeah, no, you're right. But you should feel that way about everything, right? And it just made me realize, for example, in my geometry class, I still have to teach the geometry. I couldn't be as creative. We're still building the skills, but at the end of the day, they need to learn things about triangles before I go on to the polygons and the area. I needed to build that. And it's a lot harder to tell them, you know, you need to understand the notation of array because you're going to see this on your math test. I have such a harder time where I love right now, we're getting into area and we're going to be talking about if you have to carpet a room. And when you can make those connections and get them more invested, it just makes all the difference. And now there's sometimes in math, you do have to practice the basics so that you can make those connections. But I think we wait too long to introduce the fact that in math, everything's connected. And really, math is how we describe the world. Math wasn't something that somebody's like, I'm going to invent math today. They looked at the world and said, how does that work? And started to measure things. And when we talk about history and art and combine math with it, that's how I never thought in a million years that I would teach math. It just happened to be where my certs were and where the need was. So I went there. And now that I'm here, I'm recognizing so many things in so many ways that we could be doing it differently. But prior to this, I felt so I feel the freedom to do it, right? Because we're half the time we're remote. Sometimes we're in the building. Sometimes the kids show up. Sometimes they don't. It's been a mess. But I'm not bound to my notebook of I need to get to this standard and this standard and this standard because the test and that stress for me as an educator has been lifted. So when they said that we had to do the standardized tests last week, like my heart sank because I just think we're not focused on the right things. And yeah, it's definitely just kind of, I don't know if I can go back to teaching the check boxes. And I'm curious to know if we're going to have conversations as to how we can move things forward that's not about the curriculum, but about the students.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's like part of our goal, with ECEL and the Educating All Learners Alliance. The goal is to change it over time. And we do believe, the ELA team, that it's small incremental changes over time that will create those big impacts in the future. And I know that some people in the chat were relating to what you said, like Peter mentioning that he took some time with his students to learn those basic skills so they can grow. Now, I wanted to touch on, I know you mentioned the student-teacher connection. That's so important before we even get into the instruction side of things. And I totally agree. And it's incredible the studies that have been done that show how learning can be affected or improved in this case. But I would love if you could dive in a little bit more into some ways that special education teachers can adapt the instruction to better support all of their students, whether that be students with IEPs, or maybe they're serving a hybrid classroom of general ed and special ed, all all the different arrangements. What are some of those strategies?
So I definitely direct anybody to look at John Hattie's work. I've been following him for years, and he basically took best practice and took the meta analysis and broke it down. And the number one thing that he talks about is student teacher relationships. And I tell my students constantly, I care about you before I care about the math. And that just, I've always thought it, but saying it really matters because I say it and I mean it. And the kids know that. And I think they're more and willing to, take risks and be okay with not knowing. But the specific ways, I really do think one-on-one instruction in math, once you get past a certain point and you're behind the 8 ball, so to speak, one-on-one has been amazing. So even if I'm in the class, I will put them into individual breakout rooms and just go to each one. And that helps them to stay accountable. They know that I'm checking in, that I actually care if their work is being done. And then I can address those little things that are specific to that kid. Because even if you have a kid on the autism spectrum, that kid is different from the other kid on the autism spectrum. No one, no matter what the diagnosis, are exactly the same. But the things that do work are related to semantic sensory theory, which is that you need to have visuals. And we have this wonderful tool here. And I think I'm going to share a whiteboard with you all. Okay. We're going to do a little experiment here, right? When you have the visuals, I can talk to you till I'm blue about, okay, what is 5 times 5? And if you can't see it, that's really hard because now you're doing an audio. It sometimes is choppy through the computer, right? So if you have the ability to show them 5 times 5, and I don't have my stylus out right now, so I apologize for the handwriting. All right. But now I'm talking about it. Now I'm showing them. I can show them a picture. I can pull up a video like this. I don't have to, we're no longer in the days where I have to wheel out the big cart and the kids, oh, we're going to watch a movie. It's instant. And if we can use these things, I think it really matters. The thing that is hurting my heart in math education now is that we think that if they're signed up for a program, we're doing enough. And I don't want to mention the programs because I do think that they have merit, but they have to also have this one-to-one relationship. So one of the other things is with the visuals, you also need to help them make connections. So what's another way that I can say 25? And anybody want to unmute? Tell me another way to say 25. You could say it in French. That's fine. Spanish, any Spanish speakers here tonight? What's another way to say 25?
I think French is 25.
25. Using your change, showing your hands. 5 squared. 20 plus 5.
2 10s and a 5.
2 10s and a 5, right? Thinking about and money.
Peter
25.
says 1/4.
Somebody said, okay, that could be related to 1/4. All right. And so there's all these ways. And I wish I thought about this because I actually, one of the things that I did, I love it. We got, and people talking about all kinds of things in the chat. And what I love too, is that we have this ability and to show math. So one of the frustrating things was that they had a hard time writing. So I actually did a GoFundMe for track pads. So the trackpads go into the Chromebook and have a stylus to help them so we could communicate. And it was one of the most beautiful things because I was like, I did one for like manipulatives because I do think there's such importance even at the older grades to use manipulatives and to see it and to feel it and to know it. But so I did that and it was like a $400 not a GoFundMe. I'm sorry. I did a the donors choose, right? So that's specifically for educators. And I did that and it went through, but it was like my aunt and it was like my mother-in-law. And I felt bad doing another one, but I just tried it. I said, I would love to have trackpads. And I put it in and I got to like November and I had like, it was still just like my aunt. And I was like, I'm going to and take it down. I'll put the money towards another thing. And I had asked them like, hey, can I take this down? And there's a whole process. And that weekend, one person donated $1,400 anonymously. And I got trackpads, which I then wrapped and delivered dressed as a reindeer during the holidays. So a little side note, if you ever have the chance to drive around and see where your students live, first of all, knocking on their doors and saying hi with my mask on felt so good just to see faces. But it taught me so much about their families. A lot of kids, they have young brothers and sisters, and they said, listen, I'm so sorry I'm not on Zoom, but I have to take care of my brother and I'm really sorry. I'm like, I get it, you're good, it's good. Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah, enjoy the season. It was just such a like a wonderful thing. But it was, yes, it was tied to math, and I wanted them to get their work done, and they kept saying, I can't, because I'm like, all right, well, I'll find a way. But it's not because I need you to get that grade. I'll change the grades. We'll figure out grades. I want you to be invested and to learn and to know that it can be fun. So that's
Yeah.
my long and winded way to answer your question.
No, those are great tips. And there were some other good ones shared in the chat. So definitely check those out for other participants. Things like Google Read and Write are as ways for students to engage on their computers. But kind of similar to that question, are there any tips you would say that would differentiate for a teacher who might have students with learner variability that they might not be familiar with?
Um, I mean, the main thing is getting to know the kids. And so for like, I'm fortunate enough that a lot of my geometry kids from last year are in the next class with me. It was really hard for our freshmen to jump in and to know them. But feeling free to reach out to the teacher before, um, getting as much of the information so that you really get the feel of the whole child, and also being able to talk to them about how they feel about math. Math is so much about emotions. And so if they hate math, you could teach math with monkeys and balloons and it won't matter. They're shut down the minute they walk in the room or hit the Zoom. But if you can kind of talk to them about that and they can start to confide in you, just don't give up on kids, especially kids who have difficulties in math. So when they have that and they have built up this wall, don't drown them with another worksheet and practice. Be there for them, and eventually the math will come. I had a college professor say to me, you have to reach them to teach them. And I was like, that's a cute rhyme. This year, it comes up on my mind all the time. You have to reach them to teach them. The rest of it is just, it's busy work.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Well, I wanted to hop over and also engage Chrissy in this question. Before we share resources, what are some best strategies to increase access to grade level content when students might be missing those key, prerequisite skills or concepts?
Yes. All right, I've jotted down some ideas to share. And I think the first thing is I kind of had some ideas about just like foundational things, kind of baseline, I call them, before we get into strategies. So the first one is just don't assume kids can't do it. So I think, my background is general education. I did teach some co-taught classes and things too. So I defer to the specialists in that area. I don't know with specific IEPs and things like that, but from my experience, I would never assume that a student can't do something. And so that's just one thing I wanted to mention. And then I think being mindful of your language. So I think a big thing right now, becoming more asset based. And this is something that I really try to catch and work on. It's not always easy. We, for years and years, have heard the phrases, math gap, or students are, 5 years behind, or my students can't do that, or, those kinds of things. And so I think there's, language is powerful. And I think students can pick up on that. And also just, it affects us as the educator and the way we really think about our students too. So again, just a thing to be mindful of if students do have that unfinished learning, just thinking about how we're thinking about it and communicating about it. And then the third thing I would say, just before we get into strategies, is just knowing that you do have to prioritize your content. So I think if students have a lot of unfinished learning, if it's going to probably take longer, not probably, it's going to take longer to learn the grade level content, because you are going to be backfilling some of those key prerequisites. And so I think it's unrealistic to expect that you're going to be able to get through as much. So really knowing, the major work of your grades and the pillars of your grade level is really helpful, and just giving yourself and your students some grace and not trying to race through everything.
And if I could add to that,
Yeah.
when you're looking at your standards, what we've done is broken them down into, these are the need to know, these are the nice to know. And just having that kind of mindset really helps to say, like, well, you need to know this. This would be cool if you got this, but it might not be necessary. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely grace. I'll echo that. We
Great.
could all
Yes.
use a little tidbit of that.
Yeah. And I do have a podcast. And so I'm not trying to just plug my podcast, but honestly, as I was writing this down, I was like, oh, episode 8 would be good for this one, and episode 11 and so when we share the resources, maybe I'll include those in my list to you, Rebecca, in case people want to hear more about one of those specific things. In terms of strategies, one thing that I read about from a blog was the idea of just-in-time support, not just-in-case support. I thought that was really catchy and helpful. So sometimes going into the year or going into a unit, we might say, oh my gosh, I think the kids are going to need to know this and this and this and this and this, and they don't know any of it, or a lot of the students are missing it. And so what can happen is, if you try to address all of those things thoroughly, you'll almost never get to the grade level content. So I think knowing the progression, knowing the coherence of the standards, and recognizing how things build on each other, but also knowing that let's wait till we really need that thing, and we can address it in maybe there's a second math period. Maybe you can take some time at the beginning of class. Maybe you can, Peter, I think you said sometimes you take a day or two, but right before you get to that piece. And instead of doing a blanket review chunked way before. Which, let's be honest, probably is not going to stick by the time you need to reference it.
Yeah.
So the just in time is more helpful. Another one of my favorites is using problems with multiple entry points and multiple solution strategies. So this is just like beautiful when you have time to do this, and you can find these problems, and I'll share some places if you don't have these kinds of problems in your curriculum that you use. But the idea being, you can present the whole class with the same problem, and so that way you can have that community experience. I think that's one thing I really love about math class, is the idea that we can learn from each other, and we can look at things a different way, and we can I was going to say many leads, there's more than one way to skin a cat, or many roads lead to Rome, but there's more than one way to solve the problem. And not only is that good to just know, but it can like reinforce the math more if you are able to compare strategies and all these different things. So I think when students have unfinished learning, sometimes the grade level strategy that you might be wanting to get them to might not be the way that they approach it in the beginning. And by using these open-ended problems, that's okay then. Everybody can still engage in the problem. Maybe one person is like drawing a picture. Maybe someone is using manipulatives. Maybe another person uses a table or something like that. Even if the standard is to write an equation, by using this kind of task, it validates all, where they are in the progression. And then you can kind of sequence those. If you're familiar with like the 5 practices of orchestrating math discussions, it kind of goes into detail around this. But then you can really strategically think about the order in which you have students share and the order in which you talk about them. And you can kind of step students kind of up the escalator, so to speak. And they all have their thinking represented, but you're getting them to that grade level, but they all got to participate. And I like to use the analogy of like the escalator versus an elevator. With an escalator, we can see the people on the different stairs, and we can talk and call back and forth, and we're all moving to the same place, versus an elevator where like you're just totally getting in a different door, and you don't have access to the other thinking and the other ideas in the conversation. Another one is instructional routines. So I don't know if are you familiar with those? Okay, yes, you're like, yes. But I think some of them are simpler than others. And some of the ones I love like are notice and wonder. So I think before, one thing I tend to see a lot is teachers, a response to teachers thinking that, okay, this problem is going to be too hard for my kids, is either to delay it and not put it in front of kids, or to walk students through it step by step. So before you do that, I love just doing notice and wonder, because it takes no prep. And you can even if you see, eyeballs coming out or whatever in the moment, and you hadn't anticipated that was going to happen. Okay, hang on. First, let's take a step back before you try to solve it. Let's talk about what we notice and what we wonder. And then obviously there's ones that take more prep time, like a math talk, or which one doesn't belong, or those kinds of things. But I think a lot of those are ones that, again, everyone can participate in. Everyone can notice something and wonder something. And in the midst of sharing those, some of that unfinished learning can be sort of finished in a way, or at least there's little droplets that you can latch onto as a teacher. If one student says something that maybe another student didn't know yet, okay, well now they're again learning from each other and coming up, and it's more of that community and discussion, and you can still sort of ease your way into the grade level problem. And then Rebecca, I hadn't written this one down, but when you said manipulatives, I think that's another great one. Sometimes providing a concrete or concrete manipulative, or like even a visual model. So kind of that concrete, visual, abstract progression that we all, I think, know and love. if the problem is in the abstract, I think a good strategy is like, okay, take it back one step, include a visual. If that's not quite enough, okay, is there a concrete manipulative or representation, even not quite concrete, but like, I know, virtually do what you can, but making that connection to the concrete. Those are the things I brainstormed. So I hope that's
Thank
helpful.
you.
Literally, as you're talking, my mind is like, oh my God, but I have this thing, and oh, I want to share this. I feel like, when this is what you do each day. But one of the things that I wanted to share with the notice and wonder, and I'm trying to find the PowerPoint, but right before the world shut down, I had a group of kids in my geometry class actually work with the Barnes Foundation, which is an art museum in Philly. And they actually went through that whole process. And what they had to do is they had to take a 2D, a portrait, and measure it and do the ratios to build a 3D model. And one of the most interesting outcomes, and it was really cool because then they got to go to the museum and present it, and they had to answer questions. And when I tell you, a student who never speaks, who is in speech therapy, went to the museum and wouldn't stop talking. Like I talk about it, I'm getting choked up because it was incredible. And especially since it was March 1st. So it was really like right before everything happened. But the big takeaway was that sometimes math isn't perfect. And that was something that we always say there's one answer, right? But if you talk to an engineer, like, yeah, we get pretty close, right? I mean, it's there, but there's some things that it's okay as long as your process is there and you can explain how you did it. And that was a really cool takeaway. And it started from I notice and I wonder. And when we finished, we did it again. I notice and I wonder, like, how could we have done it better? And I think we do it when we're in like a language arts class, like you have an essay, you go back and you revise it. In math, you make corrections because it's right or wrong. And I just think if we introduce strategies and maybe there's a different way to think about it. And I would really love Molly is with us today. I see a lot of you chatting. She has a book, but she also has a lot of the background on the neurology of kind of how we make connections and what that does. So definitely before the night's done, I would love to hear a little bit more from you about how we can make those bridges and really help kids get more to math than just a number, get more to math than just an answer. It's a process for sure. Yeah, no, share
Yes,
the link in the
please
chat.
do share the name of your book.
Absolutely. This is
Thank
all
you.
about community. Love it.
Yeah, feel free to add the link to the chat. And I think also maybe Molly and possibly Chrissy would be able to address a question that was kind of mentioned earlier in the chat, in the sense of, if a student may have failed a grade or a subject previously, of then, reintroducing to them. So just the overall idea of that, emotional, what goes into it emotionally, the anxiety, and how to help.
Yes, I can definitely. Yes, thank you. For those of you who don't know, I'm Molly Osborne, and I'm a former teacher and tutor in math, both special needs and mainstream, and also both classroom and one-on-one. So I've had a very wide variety of experiences. And so what I found is that a lot of times when a kid is having trouble in math, it's not because they can't or won't understand the material, but because there are mental and emotional roadblocks. And like I think you mentioned before, a good example would be like, well, what if they failed math the previous year or even a few years before? Because like a lot of times what I see is high school or even college students, and they haven't taken math in over a year. And then it's like they think it's because it's not fresh in their brain, which obviously that's a factor. So it's like you have the whole use it or lose it thing that doesn't just apply to math. So I also apply it like to sports or a musical instrument. So like I played piano when I was a child, and then I didn't play for several years, and then I had to go back to playing the simple songs that I did when I was in second grade. So it's the same principle with math. So it's not just the use it or lose it principle, but it's also the psychological roadblocks. Because for a lot of students, believe it or not, and also for a lot of parents, and even some teachers, especially at the lower grade levels, math can be a traumatic experience. And those traumatic experiences can leave the imprint on your brain. So a lot of times when I talk about the neuroscience behind math anxiety and also its deeper cousin, math shame, which I go into in my book a little bit. So basically, so you have the two main parts of the brain, and don't worry, I'm not going to be all technical and give the biology, but basically, so you have your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical and thinking part of your brain. So that's responsible for math, of course, and also for science and English and basically any other academic subject. So you need to have your prefrontal cortex working in order to solve the math problems. But then you have the more primitive limbic system, which includes the amygdala, and that's the part that's activated by anxiety and trauma. So when the amygdala and the limbic system are activated, then it's like you're an ancient caveman or cavewoman, and then a big bear comes into your cave. And then if a bear comes, are you going to have time to analyze the situation? No, you're going to run, and that's a big part of the fight or flight. So anyway, so sorry if I'm rambling on and on, but basically, so those are some of the basics of the neuroscience of math anxiety. And then one last point is that a lot of times when a student has math anxiety, a lot of times their parents also have anxiety around math. Because like, especially with the mothers and the stepmothers, I've seen a lot of times they're saying, oh, sorry, I'm not a math person. Oh, I can't help my daughter or son. But then the son or daughter internalizes those messages. So once again, that goes back to being mindful about what we tell our students and also what we tell our kids and nieces and nephews. So that's that, and I'll put the Amazon link to my book.
Thank you so much.
Wow, I feel like that could be a whole webinar in itself, just talking about that concept. My goodness. No, those are great. Well, I mean, wow. Yeah, I'm sure you all know some of those concepts just even from observation, but it's just interesting to hear the true, science and psychology behind it. So that's some good perspective to have. And I think before we share some resources, we do still have some time. If you all wanted to ask a few more questions in the chat, please feel free to add them. I'm going to check if maybe we missed any. Well,
I want to take the time to kind of brag on my students a little bit. I did finally find the PowerPoint of the Art of Math Challenge.
Yeah.
And so you see Sunday, March 1st, 2020. So they took this art and they actually had to take it and measure it and construct a 3D model. So a lot of perspective, a lot of proportions. And it was very much the kids worked in groups and they talked about it together. And at first they're like, Miss Muller, is this art class or math class? I said, yes. Like, no. Is it art or math? Yes, because they should be one in the same. So this is our final product. We had a very hard time in keeping him standing, but they also said that they were having such a hard time with the proportions that one of the things that they used in their experiment was they dyed rice and talked about the proportions that they needed to use to dye the rice with the vinegar and the coloring. So we did, so we had to stretch it a little bit, but then they actually got to go and present, and they were featured and got a chance to talk, and they talked about the process. So the interview team, they didn't care about so much the answers, but they really talked to them about like, why did this matter? And, I think we don't give kids enough time to explain why what they're doing is important, why this matters. And for so long, it's been, well, this is on the test. I'm sorry, we just have to get through. And I hope and I dream that someday it's not that. It's, hey, we're doing this because you want to be an electrician. And I know that you need X, Y, Z. And this is how we're going to get there. I do think that there's a basic understanding that they need to have. But the fact that in 11th and 10th grade, it's the first time that they're hearing and understanding that we work in base 10 is a problem. Base 10, we have 10 fingers, everything we do, the borrowing, which is always such a struggle. If they understand base 10, it's not that bad. And now we need to get kids and ready to know base 2 and coding and all kinds of things that we haven't updated our curriculum yet. So our world has changed and we're still doing math the way we did back then. And there's that big you always hear about, whoa, the Common Core math is like crazy. It's having the kids understand what they're doing, not just getting math done and doing 50 questions. I know for me, I did math, I didn't learn math. And so it's took me teaching it to appreciate it and to understand it. And now I'm circling back, and I actually think the best math teachers are the teachers that as kids struggled in math, because they know what it feels like. They know what that thought process is, and they can talk kids through. And the more that you tell kids what you're thinking about and model making mistakes and model that it's okay and model that there's a way to go back and fix it. Like I say all the time, I relate math to life, and they crack up, because the X and Y, which one is the independent, which one is the dependent. They mix it up. I said, well, when you break up and you have an X, you are independent. You can do whatever you want. But if you're sitting there going, why? You're still depending on someone else. Right? So empowerment too, right? So, but like they look at me and like I'm nuts, and it might be a little true, but until I connect it to their lives, it doesn't mean anything. An input, output, right? So that's one of my faves. We talk about when the variables are next to one another, they're getting married and they have to multiply. But sometimes it doesn't work out and they need to go to the opposite side. They divorce and they divide. It's a concept that they know. They know marriage, they know divorce, and it's a way to help them bridge the understanding and the concepts. When you learn another language, right? I'm taking you to church. When you learn another language, the way you learn is you try to find the cognates. You try to find the things that sound like like your first language. Math is the universal language, but we don't teach it like that. We don't teach the symbols as being the punctuation to explain our mathematical thinking. And so, and I think because I've been able to teach both the language arts and the math, I see how differently the worlds, like we only talk about emotions in language arts within the book, and in math, we only talk about what's right and what's wrong, and that's it. And they don't have to be separate. They really don't. So I have tons of those and little things, but I should probably write them all down or do something with them. But and I say, if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, forget I said it. If it works, do it. And sometimes I make stuff up that connects to that kid. Like I did, somebody was struggling with positive and negative and the rules for all the integers, but she plays hockey. So I said, all right, 0 is the center line. The offense is the positive. The defense is the negative. And that's how we talked about it, because it was in her frame of reference and it made a difference.
I love this. And
Love this.
according to the
Thank
chat,
you, Mel.
everybody else is. We'll definitely have to have another session and share some more tips. I wanted to add though, before we continue sharing resources, I wanted to add Ela's site to the chat, which we'll share as a resource to reference. But like I mentioned, we do have a resource library. So we offer resources, but we're always intaking new resources. So if you all, I know you're listing so many, but if you would submit them to the site, we can also see about, vetting them. And we're always interested in curating more resources. So please feel free to submit those if you are so inclined. And we'd love to share. But Chrissy, you mentioned some. Did you want to share a few resources and of course, if people are taking notes, they can write them down. But again, we'll be sharing all of these with you after.
Sure. Before I do that, can I just piggyback on what Rebecca was saying before? Okay, another thing that when I was a math coach, our whole team of teachers did was something that's always stuck with me. So I just wanted to share, because I agree with you, Rebecca. I used to teach almost all the subjects when I used to teach in a Catholic school. And I had this false belief that like reading was the time we connected and like math was harder, So this is an example of something that has worked, which is connecting your personal like stories to mathematical mindsets and like the standards for math practice. So, and teachers were able to personalize this. So we kind of were all working as a team on getting our students to persevere more with math. They had a lot of math anxiety, a lot of history of feeling unsuccessful, not all of them, but a large number of our students. And so this was a problem in a lot of the math classes, of a lot of blank papers and, not many hands being raised and those kinds of things. And so we were collectively trying to figure out how to shift the classroom culture and just get kids to be willing to kind of put themselves out there a little more and take some risks. And so each teacher thought about an analogy or a personal story or something that would highlight one of the math practices or one mathematical mindset. So like one teacher was really into working out. And so she talked about malleable intelligence, but in terms of working out. And like, if you are the one lifting the weights, you're going to be working your muscles and you're going to get stronger. And okay, your brain is a muscle too. And so they like read an article and she told this story. And then she put a poster up in her room of, an arm with some weights, and it was like, how much have you lifted today or something like that. And so just taking 15 or 20 minutes to do this, then if they were in a situation where this was happening and it was a really tough problem, and she could like point to that even in the beginning, and okay guys, like this is one that's going to work our brain muscle and yada yada. And like I said, other teachers did other things. Everybody found something that was like personal to them. Another teacher told a story about her grandma, and I don't remember the phrase, but it was like something catchy that her grandma would always say to her. It was like, ain't nothing, something, I don't remember. But she told the story of her grandma, and the bottom of the moral of the story was like, risk taking and making mistakes is like better than not trying. So then she could use that later on. And I just thought it was a cool way to like be vulnerable and be open and share a part of who they were with their students in math class. And it also like paid dividends in terms of the classroom climate and just those mathematical mindsets. So just want to share that. Okay, in terms of resources, let me see what I wanted to share with y'all. If you're familiar with Achieve the Core, they've got tons of resources on there, including some documents to help you focus your instruction. So they're like focused by grade level documents. They've got a great blog on there. And so I'll include a couple links to the one about the just-in-time support. I also have a blog on there about unfinished learning that I can link to as well. Just make a note about that. And then Joe Bowler's website, U Cubed, is really great for all things mathematical mindsets and multiple strategies and visual math and things like that. The Illustrative Mathematics site, it is a curriculum now, but I'm actually talking about the tasks, which was kind of their original site, so I can link to that. They have a lot of tasks and problems that have multiple entry points, multiple strategies. And then I'll link to some math language routines. So we talked about instructional routines, and some specific ones are like a subset of instructional routines, or the math language routines. And so they have a great blog post on there called Math Instructional Routines, Creating Opportunities for Students with Disabilities to Grapple with Grade Level Math. So I thought that was pretty on the nose for what we were talking about tonight. And then I'll link to my own website too. A couple things that stick out would be the podcast. And again, I'll list out some of the episodes that relate to things we've talked about tonight. It's called the Mindful Math Podcast, and it's on Spotify and Apple and all the places. And then I also have a increased access resource bundle, and that is like 3 different things. One of them is a list of 10 strategies like notice and wonder and things like that, that really help increase access to grade level math. There's also a planning guide in there, which it's a planning guide specifically for lessons around these kinds of tasks. So if you're doing a whole group lesson with a problem that has multiple entry points, and you're going to spend a good 20 minutes on this problem, it walks you through just like some things you'd want to think through ahead of that problem. And then there's also a T-chart of like asset-based versus deficit-based language, just kind of some things, sentence stems and things to help you or maybe your colleagues to like try to start shifting some of that language.
Language matters so much. Yes.
Yeah.
So we are coming up to the hour here. I want to thank Gabrielle and Chrissy so much for being here, and for Molly for jumping in. I just met with her a couple days ago, and I was like, you have to be here. So hopefully you'll come back, because I feel like there's a lot more that you have to share. But just thank you for giving me the chance to talk about the things that I'm passionate about. I do, if you signed up through Eventbrite, I do have your email address. So all of the resources that Chrissy mentioned, I will be and sending them to you directly. If there's another email address that you would like me to send that to, please put that in the chat and I will record that down. But we are a weekly show. What started as a little passion project has turned into just a wonderful place to meet like-minded folks for support. And, each week the topic is a little bit different. And believe it or not, we are booked up until June 30th. And so I'm going to end season 1 on June 30th, because it will be a complete year that I've started this. And we're already booking for next fall. So if you or someone has something to share, needs support, this is going to be a trying time for educators for the next few years. Education was always hard, and now we have a couple of added layers. So the way that we get through that is with one another, and there's amazing resources like EALA, or what is the actual, and what do you call yourself in the group? Is it
the Educating All Learners Alliance?
But it's Ella, or is it?
Oh, ELA.
ELA. Okay. It's ELA. But check out the website. It's amazing. And, all of this is with the same frame of mind that we need to come together to support one another so we can do the hard work on the day-to-day to support the kids, because that's who it's all about. So I thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to stop recording. This will be available for you to watch through our website, which is www.learningrevolution/group/ECEL. I will also put that in the email. So thank you again, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thanks.